Hi. Over the next 18 minutes, we're going to talk about all of those things. We're going to talk about revolution, and we're going to talk about gender and sexuality and identity. And for me, what this really all comes back to is talking about my nails. Because they may not look like it, but my nails are a radical example for me, my political identity, and my gender. So when you think about yourself and you think about your world around you, you are given a story, a narrative. Your life is a book that you're supposed to open and read and find yourself in, but it's a book, and you're supposed to find yourself in that. And if, for some reason, you don't find yourself in those stories, if you are a little boy in grade 2 who's really, really excited about the idea of fatherhood someday, but the only people who are allowed to talk about that are the little girls with their baby dolls, well, you're going to have a certain experience. Or if, as we heard earlier, you're the Asian who can't really manage to pull all A's in math class, or you don't want to play the piano, well, you're going to have a slightly different experience. Or if, like me, you were the little white girl who, instead of wanting to play dress up and with Barbies, I really liked getting muddy and falling down and getting covered in scratches, and I had no ability to match my clothes to each other, well, you're going to have a certain experience because the story that you were given, the narrative that your society tells you exists for your life, and the life that you actually live, or possibly the one that you see your best friend living, isn't going to match. That experience is called cognitive dissonance. Those two stories that just don't go together. The little things around you, they don't actually match up with who you want to be, or what you see, or what you experience, or maybe some of the people around you. And you have a couple of choices when this happens. One, you can try to force it to work. It's what George Orwell in his famous book 1984 refers to as doublethink, the ability to hold two opposing ideas in your mind and somehow force them to work, to go back and forth. And for me, this was the experience of saying, well, okay, yeah, but I'm not like other girls. And that meant that I could ignore the narrative, which was useful, but it didn't actually change it. And the narrative was still uncomfortable for me. Or, alternately, you can try to build new narratives. Ones not based on stereotypes, ones that are more honest, and ones that hopefully will foster empathy and understanding. As we've heard already, those are very important things. So what I want to give you is 5 steps. 5 steps to world change. Because to me, changing these narratives will change the world. Because you're going to realize that you have other opportunities, other ways of thinking and seeing the world that you maybe don't realize now. And that children being born now will be able to grow up with new narratives. And that'll be really important. Because when you don't know an idea exists, you can't actually choose new paths. So, the first step in all of this is to know who you are. I know that seems really easy, but it's actually much more complicated than we usually think about. So as an example, this is who I was in high school. This is who I thought of myself as. And these were the pieces of my identity that I crafted, and the ones that I was proud of, and the ones that I told people about. And I'm sure that somewhere inside you, you have a list like this. And I want you to just take a second and try to think of what things exist on that list. Because that's the person you're trying to tell people you are. And your crafted identity is important. And once you've got a few points, and you've kind of got this idea of who you are, then I want you to think about the almost self-evident things that you missed. The things that, while utterly obvious, you never even thought of. The things that aren't crafted, because those are really important too. Those are the places often that you're going to find the greatest dissonance. And for me, we're going to talk about that last one, because it's the one that got me started on all this. So once you have this self-identity and you've got this kind of idea, this list, and I highly encourage you to write it down and check back on it every 6 months or 12 months and go, is that really who I still am? Or I really thought that? Maybe I need to rethink that piece of that. Well, then you're going to start watching for challenges to that identity. You can't look for challenges to something until you know what the something is. So, challenges to your identity. I'll take you through me. When I was born, a doctor held me up by the feet and yelled, "It's a girl!" And everybody was excited and bought pink roses and little balloons for my mom, and everybody was happy. Very exciting. And as time went on, that was okay. I had, the birthday party in the frilly dress, and I read books with my sister. And as I got older, I became less and less comfortable with what the narrative of being a girl meant. It made me more and more uncomfortable. And I could never put my finger on it. What was it about the girl thing? I knew that I was comfortable with the concept. The word was the right word. I was female. That was fine by me. I had no problems with that. And yet, something didn't line up, and I allowed myself to take that easy way out of not being like other girls, so I could ignore all of the things in the word that made me uncomfortable, and all of the expectations from those narratives I was given that made me unhappy. I was a jock. I was really into martial arts. This is me at my black belt testing in high school. And I was a complete and utter academic nerd. I am here dressed up for the Ides of March, the day when they stabbed Julius Caesar to death. I wore that toga all over campus in loving memory. But by college, I had grown so uncomfortable that I refused to put on makeup. I eschewed dresses. I felt uncomfortable and judged in them. And what I didn't realize was that I was being judged by myself. Now, while I was in college, this really wonderful thing happened. I met someone, and I got married. And this is one of the only pictures of me between the ages of 19 and 30 that you will see me in a dress. Because some part of me fed into the narrative of wearing a dress to my wedding. But I made sure everybody knew that I had little leggings on underneath it. Very important that everybody knew that. And I was wearing flat shoes because goodness knows I wasn't going to wear heels because they made me not just physically but emotionally uncomfortable. And my wife and I moved to Taiwan. We were very happy. And that little thing that continued to niggle in the back of my head just sat there niggling. Because I could actually ignore it most of the time. I didn't wear makeup, I didn't need to wear dresses, so I was okay just ignoring the fact that it existed, and I could go on with my life, and that was fine. So I'd found challenges, but I hadn't confronted them. Because every time it came up, I simply said, this isn't a big deal. This isn't really a big problem. Just push it back, and I'm just me. It's just me. But I didn't realize that I was judging the other women around me who actually did do these things that made me uncomfortable. And there were times when I even tried to convince them not to do it because you know what? That's just them selling you a certain version of womanhood, and that's not cool. Completely ignoring that, of course, there's more than one version of womanhood. But I was uncomfortable with any version that wasn't mine. What I needed was a model of confrontation, a way to actually look at it. And the example I'm going to give you on the surface kind of looks like examples that I had, but the experiences are incredibly different. And yet, it was a model of confrontation for me, a way to start asking more important questions. So when Amber was born, she had the same pink balloons and little roses, and everybody was happy, and she went home. And in college, she met this really wonderful woman, and they got married, and they moved to Taiwan, and they were happy. But while I was dealing with a certain piece of my identity, the piece that had to do with my definition of the word female, of the word girl, of woman. Amber was walking down a path that, like I said, on the outside it looks really similar, and yet it was so incredibly different. Because Amber realized after we moved here that while it wasn't the definitions of woman that made her uncomfortable, it was the being a woman that didn't work. So Amber became Sky, and my wife came out as my husband and confronted those things. And this was not an easy process. This was a difficult process of asking lots and lots of very complicated questions. Questions like, not just what does it mean to be a woman, because that was never the question. The question was, who am I? A much bigger question than I had been approaching. And a question that was much scarier because it was a much deeper redefinition of self. And my husband came out as my spouse eventually. And I've never seen them happier. And I've never seen them more true to themselves. And for me, this was what I wanted. I wanted a version of self that was true, that was me, that I could identify as. I needed to confront those questions. I needed to confront that definition. But to confront it, I had to go back. And I had to ask the questions again. Because I figured that once I'd gone through them in high school, we were done, right? I mean, you don't have to learn things twice. Except that it's not learning, it's experience, and it's growth, and it's change. Because my narrative didn't fit me. And I realized that the narrative that I'd been given for women actually didn't fit the women around me either. And so I started asking questions not just of myself. And that was the piece that was important. Because when Sky went through their identity confrontation, we talked about it together. They talked about it with other people, and this was the model of confrontation I needed. Asking really hard questions. Really hard questions. Things that have the ability to change you fundamentally. Questioning not just who you are, but why you're that person, and whether you've chosen to be that person, or whether it was chosen for you. Did you accept the narrative because it was easy? Or did you actually go through a process of deciding that it was important to be that person? And so I started having these conversations with everyone. And this amazing thing happened. I realized that the narratives didn't fit anyone I knew. And so I figured out that the last piece of this was to not stop asking, but also to never stop asking other people. This is not an experience that can happen only in yourself. This is an experience, if we're going to change the world and we're going to change the narratives so that people have more choices, so people have more ability to understand who they are and what their abilities and potential and opportunities are, then we can't stop asking, and we have to ask others. And you don't have to have an answer when you ask. You just start asking. So I asked the women around me what it meant to be a woman. And I found that none of them had narratives that met that story that I'd been told of Sleeping Beauty waiting for her prince to come. Or even the TV shows I watched growing up. None of us were any of those people, and that was okay. But we also learned that those narratives had to be rewritten, and that you rewrite them by talking to people and asking questions and asking them to actually look into who they are. And I figured out through this process of questioning that, the harder the question you ask, the more important the answer is going to be. So it's one thing for me to stand here and ask what it means for me to be a woman. But I had a conversation with a friend a little while ago. She's Asian American, and I was talking to her, and I said, so, you're Asian. What does that mean to you? Are you proud of it? And she's like, yes, I'm proud of it. And she had an answer for what it meant, because she'd had to think through it. She'd actually gone through that experience of thinking through what it meant for her to be Asian in the United States. And then the darndest thing, she looked at me and she said, so what does it mean for you to be white? And I had nothing. I had no answer for that at all. Because I'd never thought about it, All the people on the TV shows were white, and everyone where I grew up was white, and, it wasn't something that people had ever asked me about before, and nobody challenged it. And I realized that was a lot harder question and really scary, because if I started asking what that meant, then I had to deal with all of those things that came along with being white. And I had to actually have an identity based on acknowledging it instead of what I'd always had, which was an identity based on ignoring it and pretending it didn't matter. Because it matters. Of course it matters. So I asked my friends difficult questions. And I'm a teacher, and I ask my students difficult questions. And the whole point is to get them to think about this. Friends, students, my parents, everyone. Because I think everybody needs to answer these questions. Everyone needs to find the answers. And you'll find out that the most important questions in these are the ones that come up when you start asking the things you've never thought about, the things you've always taken for granted. Questions of race and gender and faith and nationality and language, the things that you've always just accepted as true. The same way that we accept that the sky is blue and we don't, outside about grade 3 when they explain it, really ask why. I had to start asking what it meant for me to be white, and what it meant to have been raised Protestant, and what it meant to be a woman, and what it meant to be American. And I'm still working on them, and I'm still asking these same questions. And I'll have you know, I ask my mother the same question every couple years, and the conversation we have changes every time. And that's the best part, because it means that the ideas change. Dissonance is a sign. This thing where your world doesn't match, where you start to notice little bits of discomfort, and you kind of push them off, and you're like, no, it's cool, and you start that double think process where, on the one hand, I know that girls wear dresses and makeup and that they want to be mothers and have children, and yet on the other hand, I am not going to have children, and I am not interested in pink fluffy dresses most of the time, and how do I make these match? And I go, it's okay. I'm just not like that. Everybody else is like that. But I'm not like that, and that's okay. Because not everybody else is like that. And those moments of dissonance, start looking for them, because they're a sign that something isn't right. Something in the narrative is wrong or missing, because the narrative was easy. And we like easy. It's comfortable. And when you notice that, ask yourself what's wrong. Ask yourself where it's coming from, and then ask other people. I paint my nails as a way to explain this to people. I painted them as a way to come to terms with my femininity, to walk out of the house and ask why, when nobody noticed that I'd painted my nails, why did I feel self-conscious and shameful? Why was I uncomfortable with this? And it was because I thought that people were judging me and were seeing me as much more effeminate, maybe than I felt or something. And the reason I felt shame was I thought that all these bad things were going to come along with it, because those were the messages I was given. So I paint my nails so I can ask other people. It's to remind me to ask other people these hard questions. Because when we ask questions, and when we start challenging easy identities, when we start challenging those stereotypes, then what started out as a whisper of discomfort turns into a roar of disillusionment where people realize that the story isn't true. And that's when the stories change. And that's how we change the world. Thank you.